Welcome to the Customer Smarts podcast, where you'll discover smarter ways to deliver customer experiences. I'm your host, Justin Stafford. Over the past 20 years, driving customer growth has become far more complex. There's now a myriad of digital channels across a mix of paid, owned, and earned assets that you can leverage to engage customers. However, many organisations are still taking an old school approach, over-focusing on acquisition and under-focusing on retention, when there are much smarter ways to drive customer growth. My guest in this episode, Gareth Begent, has a wealth of experience working for companies like Adobe, Foxtel, and Optus in senior marketing roles, helping them find smarter ways to generate customer growth. In this episode, we're going to explore the complexity of driving customer growth, the most important analytics to focus on, the imbalance between acquisition and retention, and how to adjust for a tight economy that we're in right now. Welcome, Gareth. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Justin. Thanks for having me.
We're at a point now where digital has made it really easy to track user interaction. So it means most marketers and companies are, drowning in analytics and data. In your recent roles, how did you get clarity on what was actually working?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges that brands have is too much data. Companies have got so much data, not just on their prospects, but also on their customers, internal customers. The challenge, I think, is uncovering the data that's actually actionable. So what's the data that we can actually use specifically to drive growth? And I think the first step is really ensuring that marketing teams are crystal clear from the start on what their KPIs are before they run any campaign. So what is the measure of success of this campaign? Instead of, I think as marketers, we get into the routine of just running lots of campaigns, but what is the specific measure of success for this campaign versus that campaign? Are they aligning back to the goals of the business? And look, I think you'd be surprised that a lot of marketing teams don't do this. They've got top line KPIs, but they don't have very specific KPIs that they can then come back and track the success of. So one of the things I think we really need to start with, and a lot of it is just, I think 101 is creating KPIs that are smart. And you've probably heard of the SMART goals that are widely used, within marketing teams. I think a lot of the tech companies are very good at using it in the US. I think, every single KPI needs to be specific. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be achievable. It needs to be relevant, and it needs to be time bound. So making sure that every KPI that your team or your marketing teams set ticks each of those boxes before you run any single campaign. And making sure, again, it aligns with the goals of the business. And that's kind of the first step. I think the second step then is running the campaign and sharing the insights with the business. So I think the companies that are succeeding at this these days are very disciplined with regular insights and planning days in the form of, it could be things like quarterly reviews or company-wide quarterly reviews. So not just the marketing team, but get as many people in the room as possible and making sure we're sharing those insights. I think the aim of these QBRs really is to summarize the key learnings and insights from across the business. So, you could be bringing in research teams and looking at, qualitative and quantitative research. You could bring in the product teams, brand versus performance teams, how they're working together. What should one team be doing? What should the other team not be doing? Acquisition versus retention teams. What's the impact for more money in market for acquisition on retention? Does that drive churn, or does that improve the performance of what we're doing? And then also things like paid media and organic. If your organic channels are performing really, really well, maybe you don't need to put as much money into paid media. So I really think just sharing and having those sessions on a regular basis really, really helps businesses understand what is actually driving growth. And I think the last step really is just, using this data to set the strategy for the year. So making sure each area of the business maybe shares their top 5 learnings of the quarter with the rest of the business. And we have a conversation about what's working and what's not. And the key thing is creating actions off the back of those learnings to actually say, well, what are these actions going to do in order to achieve our goals? So sharing information across the business and making sure that over a year or two, you've got a bank of insights in terms of what's working and what's not. You can map it back to seasonal trends, and you can really start to understand how is not just marketing, but how is the entire business from product teams, research, media, marketing helping to drive growth.
Yeah, having that data sharing culture is so important, isn't it? I think, sometimes organizations are data sitting in silos and people operate or teams operate in silos. So, they don't know what's going on and, running activities, which, drives frustration in other areas. That's, almost more common than not, isn't it?
It's incredibly common, Justin. Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting that we're starting to see is some really sophisticated, attribution modeling and marketing science tools to drive, new insights in different ways. Did you use any of those kinds of tools, and did you find them helpful at all?
Yeah, like I think in previous roles, I think we've touched on across both telco and tech companies is marketing mix modeling, which you've probably heard of the term. It's basically where you feed a model historical data. So, what marketing channels have you run over the last 5 years, and potentially look at and overlay that with sales and churn data, for example. So, the model will essentially predict what it thinks the right channel mix is based on your goals. And you can really see the impact of every single channel on business performance. So, for example, we get out of home in market. Do we see a spike in churn? When I run TV, I see a massive uplift in awareness. If I'm running too much online, what does that do to churn? So I think it really just allows you to look at. I think you want to have a lot of data, though. I think you want to look at least the last 3 to 5 years, and try and look at some trends in the data to see which channels specifically are driving. Whether it's driving your sales or is it helping to reduce churn. As I said, though, I think the biggest challenge really with the model is making sure that it's really only as good as the data that you feed it. So I think you really need to ensure that the data is in the right place to feed to a lot of third-party data teams. So you've got, very structured, this is how much I spent this month, this quarter. These are our sales or churn by week. Feed the model that sort of data, and then we can spit out and give you some indications of where you should be spending your money and essentially how you can get more efficiencies across the business.
Now I'd like to talk a bit about how to avoid getting caught in a race to the bottom of the funnel. I think, performance media has become a bit of a crutch for a lot of marketers, almost a bit like an addiction. Mostly because I think it's the easiest to track and prove ROI. It's obviously really important in the marketing mix and plays a really important role, but sometimes they do get caught, battling it out at the bottom of the funnel and, can forget about creating awareness for the long term. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think particularly right now, brands are focusing on bottom of funnel activity. They have to be hitting some sort of sales number. If you look at what's going on in the market and all the trends, it's really, really important for brands to be hitting their targets. And brands tend to be focusing a lot, and probably too much time on that bottom of the funnel activity. I still think brand is incredibly crucial to really take customers on the journey. I think the missing piece for me and what I've seen in previous roles is sort of that mid funnel consideration layer. And I think if I look at, say, an example of a brand I've worked on in the past, say Binge, what is that why message? Why should a customer sign up to Binge, for example? An example would be, for example, like create messaging around what that why is. So it could be like, what is the best content? Is it the best experience for Binge? Is it the best value? So I think there's a real opportunity there to create that why message. And I think once you've got that mid-funnel message in market, we can really start to measure the impact of the sales at the bottom of the funnel. So I really do think there's that opportunity there to play in that mid-funnel space and really talk about the product benefits, the why message of a brand. I think a lot of brands do the brand layer, the emotional layer really, really well. And then, we spend so much money again on that bottom of funnel, but I don't think many brands probably spend enough time creating messaging around that mid-funnel consideration layer, which I call that why layer.
Yeah, there's often that gap, isn't there? That mid-layer gap, like you're talking about. I've seen it a lot in the past, and I think it comes down to like a budget. Spend all their money in the top part, trying to make things look great and connect, and connect emotionally, and then you put the rest into the performance stuff down the bottom. But there is that journey. How are you keeping those customers warm? I think that's always a challenge. So how do you maintain a balance, I guess? Have you seen that done in the past well, where you've got, I guess, those three layers and not just the top and the bottom?
Yeah, it depends on a number of factors. It depends on the industry. I think it depends on your competitors, your short and long term goals, also your marketing budget. But I think from what I've seen, established businesses like your large corporations, I think the recommended ratio is probably more of that 60% brand, 40% bottom of funnel. I think if you're sort of in that early stage business, it's really important to grab a share of the market and drive sales to survive. So you could flip it. And I think, for those early stage businesses, maybe it's more around that 60% in favor of bottom of funnel direct response and more of that 40% in favor of brand. But I do think a lot of established businesses in the past, as I said before, are still spending probably too much money on that bottom of funnel. How do we maybe start to use some of that brand budget? If you've already got a successful brand, people are aware of the product, the awareness is really high, to create some more of that messaging and put some more budget in that middle of funnel layer, and really sort of see what is the impact then on the sales of the bottom of funnel 2, 3, 4 weeks later.
How would you go about convincing people above to shift some of the budget from I guess, that performance bracket up into that middle layer? How would you go about doing that if they're sort of, oh, well, we're not going to be able to see the ROI on this, and maybe lacking confidence in that middle layer? How do you sort of convince them to do that?
Yeah, look, I think there's a number of ways. I think looking back at historical data, I mean, use marketing mix model as a prime example. You know, are we spending too much money in TV and out of home and not enough in the bottom of funnel? Or are we seeing diminishing returns with, I might be spending 100 grand a month on online display, an extra 200 grand doesn't necessarily deliver an extra 20% increase. So I think online budgets, you can look at diminishing returns of an extra 10% of budget only gets me an extra 2% back. So having a look at that point, and then having a look at just metrics around, your awareness might be high, your brand consideration might be low. So how do we start to tell consumers a bit more around the why, the mid funnel layer, some of the product benefits? And by putting the mid funnel activity in market, are you actually now seeing conversion rates higher at the bottom of the funnel? Like if you had no middle layer, what do the sales look like? If you then had a middle layer, what do the sales look like, and compare the two? And then I would think, and what I've seen in the past is when you have that mid layer in market, your conversion rate normally increases, because it's not just about, I've got the emotional layer. It's not just about, okay, cool, the logic and the sale. I'm understanding another reason why I should, say, purchase that product or service. So I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really helping get up, I guess, get upstream, so to speak, to that next level of customers who aren't quite ready to buy yet. I've sort of talked about that before. What are you doing for those customers who aren't quite ready to buy? Because there's a lot you can do, and I feel like that's the massive opportunity, like you said, in that middle layer, because not a lot of brands do that very well.
100%.
Now, I'd like to, I guess, talk a little bit about the imbalance between acquisition and retention. You mentioned it before, and we've spoken about this before as well. How in big companies, acquisition of new customers is typically prioritized ahead of retention of customers in quite a big way. So often when large scale campaigns are run, they can sometimes annoy customers who are on edge and cause them to churn. This tends to create, I guess, a lot of tension between marketing and customer service teams. Can you talk us through your experiences on that?
Yeah, look, I think acquiring customers is obviously very important for any company. I think companies need to grow, and if they're not acquiring customers, they're not growing. So I also think there's a lot of pressure on businesses these days to keep shareholders happy. But I do think it's about finding the right balance between acquisition and retention. I think the challenge with a lot of larger companies these days really lies with the way the marketing teams are set up. I think there's a lot of operational inefficiencies in marketing teams today. I think teams are very siloed, and a lot of teams are set with individual KPIs. And I think that probably needs to change, and a lot of businesses are looking to change that. In places I have worked in the past, I think, there could be as many as 4 departments sending communications out to the same customer. If I look at telcos, for example, you could have an acquisition team, a retention team, a loyalty team, and a service team all sending a message to the customer at the same time, or there could be anywhere between 4 to 6 messages going to that customer in 1 week. So it could be a bit of a spray and pray approach. So I think, really marketing departments are competing for the customer's attention, and they're not really working together. And I think there's a lot of ways that marketing teams can improve how they send comms out to customers and essentially improve the customer experience to drive, a better outcome.
Silos are definitely a big challenge, aren't they? So, how did you go about, or have you seen ways on creating connection between teams? Operating in silos in your individual swim lanes, as you say, is create some of these challenges. How do you go about getting people working better together?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of solutions here, which I think have worked quite well. I think instead of having teams bombard the customer with lots of different messages, I think companies could be using marketing automation tools as an example. So large CRMs, which really act as the decisioning engine for the marketing messages. So I think the CRMs can send the comms out to the customer based on where they're at in the product lifecycle. So again, if I look at telco, within certain CRMs, we can set up triggers that actually go out to the customer within the CRM. So say, for example, I'm in a mobile contract. Month 1 of that mobile contract, I might get a welcome message, which tells me all about the telco's products and services, loyalty programs. Month 2 could be a free perk. Month 6, when my NPS is really, really high, it could be about a sales message trying to sell me an additional device. So it's no longer around sort of that spray and pray. It's now sending out strategic messages to each customer based on where they're at in the product lifecycle, but also based on the data that we have on them. So you might be more inclined to want to receive email. I might be more likely to respond to text message. Another consumer might be more likely to engage with the app. So we're feeding it the data, and at the same time, I think we're setting up triggers based on, again, whether customer is in the product lifecycle. And I think a lot of that comes back to improving the customer experience. The customer is no longer getting 10 messages a week. They might be getting 2, but they're very strategic in terms of why they're getting those 2 messages. And then we can then tailor the messages to that specific customer. So I might be in a month 21 of my contracts. Let's give this person a free upgrade message because we know where they're at in the product lifecycle. Whereas you're in month 1, you get that onboarding message and that welcome message. So again, it's very strategic. And I think we can also look at choosing a point in time to send comms out. So it could be, first thing in the morning when people are coming to work. It could be in their lunch hours. It could be at 6 o'clock when they're at home and they've got more of that time to think and engage. So I think that's one of the ways I think we can fix this imbalance. I think the second one, which is probably more prevalent across a number of businesses that I've seen in the last couple of years, is that agile environment. It's squad-based working. So I think each squads can be set up. Each squad has a specific KPI. So Team 1, it's more around, say, driving sales. Team 2, it could be around reducing churn. And I think the solution here is that all teams carry shared KPIs. So every team carries, say, a sales target and, say, a churn target. And what this really means is that teams are encouraged to work together on the business's KPIs instead of competing with each other on their individual KPIs. And I think this really means that teams are making better decisions, and they're actually focusing on what's best for the customer versus what's best for that specific team in order to hit their own individual KPI.
Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. The movement from individual product-centric KPIs where everyone's fighting and competing against each other to shared customer-centric KPIs where teams are working together on specific customer goals as opposed to competing against each other. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
100%. And I think businesses are seeing a lot more efficiency now just by having agile environment, squad-based working set up. You're giving each of the squads specific targets to hit, and then you have to try and hit those in a certain period of time. You're presenting insights back to the business. It makes teams a little bit leaner, but they're all working on common goals to hit certain outcomes for the business versus just sending lots and lots of different messages for the sake of it. Everything that teams are doing is very strategic. And is timely, is going after a certain type of audience. So I think it's really, really important. And I think a lot of businesses, I think in the last probably 2 or 3 years, are seeing a lot of success off the back of having squad-based agile working, and particularly marketing teams.
I guess the other challenge is for the bigger companies, it's hard to change the structure and ways of working. Some of them get stuck. I was chatting to someone last week who was working at one of the big banks and talking about going through restructure after restructure and trying different things because there's so many people. It's so hard to implement change. Have you, I guess, seen moving to agile? Have you and those ways of working? Have you? What's worked well that you've seen that you're going, oh, okay, that's what we should try and replicate in next time round because that's worked particularly well and helped a big organization kind of start working differently?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to like what. Say I look at a telco, for example. What does the business want to achieve this quarter, this year? What are the KPIs? And then set up teams around that versus just saying, let's just have an acquisition and a customer team. The customer team just focus on customer messages. The acquisition team just focus on acquisition. Let's set up squads based on what are the priorities and the KPIs for the business. And then there could be 6 or 7 teams. But you could bring in people. The other thing too is you bring in people from other parts of the business too. So you're not just having a marketing team. You could have a squad that has research in it, a product team. You might have an acquisition team that has someone from the customer team as well as someone from the acquisition team. And bringing in people from around the business with lots of different insights really, really helps. And I think then they have certain KPIs to hit, as I said, but having shared KPIs with the other teams. So it's like all certain teams are all about having a shared KPIs, but then you've also got specific KPIs within that team. But what it really means is that each team is working towards common goals for the business, strategic goals, but then you also might have your own individual KPIs within those teams. And again, it makes things a lot more efficient. I think having sprints is really important to say, we've got a certain timeline to try and hit this number or to try and solve this problem. And if it's not, it's fine, but let's present back where we're at with the business. So again, back to what I said at the start is sharing those insights and how are things working. Let's try this. I didn't work. That's fine. Let's try something else. Constant tests and learning as well is really, really important. So I think this all comes back to having the right structure though in the business, moving away from those silos, moving more to this agile environment. And I think, as I said, I've seen a lot of businesses in the last 2-3 years start to move into this this method of working. A restructure can be good for business. Changes can be good for business. Change is good. But it does take a bit of time for I think a lot of traditional marketers to start to work in that way because they're used to working for 10, 15 years in a certain way. Now they have to work with 5 or 6 people they haven't worked with before, and they might be working on something that they may not have worked on before. But at the end of the day, it goes back to, helping to improve the efficiencies or hit the goals of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, fascinating looking at some companies who still haven't been able to implement that, and you can just see how slow and inefficient they are. But the ones that are operating in the more agile, customer-centric ways have been able to deliver on customer goals much more efficiently. They're way ahead. And then, if you look at AI, for instance, and you supercharge the product-centric model, it's only going to help you so much, but the ones who are customer-centric then use AI are going to be like, way ahead of the ones who aren't implementing that change.
100%. And I think it also just comes back to the priorities on the customer, and this is what we're talking about, but it comes back to what is best for the customer versus how do I hit my number,
Yeah.
And
I
I
think
think
the team
that's,
working together on those numbers, I think.
yes,
There's nothing worse I've found sometimes in organizations where, you go up to have a conversation with someone in a different department, and it's like you're on different teams. You're on opposed teams. So I guess that idea of bringing people together, shared, like the mindset of, working together, shared KPIs, then bringing people from all parts of the business, and you're a working team as a squad, just seems so much. It just makes much more sense. It's going to be way more efficient.
100%, totally agree.
Yeah. So another thing that's really interesting, obviously the economy is not the greatest and brightest at the moment, and when that happens, marketing budgets tend to get cut, but there's still an expectation to maintain growth. In your, I guess, previous roles, what are some of the things that you would do in a time like this to continue driving growth?
Yeah, great question. So I think the first thing is probably back to what I spoke about earlier is around content. So I think developing content, both short form and long form content, and just making sure we're putting this content out on a regular basis. And I think that really helps brands during slower times. I think, the content that you create, you could be running it across all of your own channels. It's free, so you don't necessarily have to rely on all of your paid channels if you've got a reduced budget. So you keep putting that content out across your YouTube channel, across all of your social channels like Facebook, Instagram. And if you do have budget, that's great. You can use that same content and run it across all your paid channels too, like your YouTubes and your TikToks. And I think really just by posting regularly, brands can really show off all of their products and really develop that relationship and that connection with the customer. So when that customer is ready to buy, the brand is top of mind. So I think creating content and getting it out there is really, really important for brands right now. I think the other thing, which is probably a given, is really just focusing on optimization. So, if I've got less budget, I have to be really laser focused on which of our marketing efforts is driving the best outcome for the business. And I think within media, optimizing, your best possible media channels, the best possible ad formats, the audiences, the messaging, and which of those really drives the best possible return on investment at the lowest possible cost. And I think within digital marketing, if I had to sort of talk about that for a second, I think really going after that low-hanging fruit. So channels that are real, like search, for example, that are really high intent, retargeting customers that are engaging with your brand off your website, off your social media, because we know they're in the market to buy. So go after that low-hanging fruit to get those sales on the board. And I think, if there's larger companies that have got more budget, and you're spending a lot of money on TV, you could be looking to reduce your budget. So things like free-to-air TV, and not for channels where you can reach a similar audience or the same audience at a lower cost. So maybe investing more in things like BVOD, which is your broadcast video on demand, or even YouTube. So optimizing towards the channels that have worked well in the past, but again, specific audiences and messaging, I think is really, really important during a time of a slow economic downturn. And I think the big thing for me is kind of back to what we've been talking about this whole time, is on the customer. Like how do we retain customers during the times of slow economic growth? And I think that's probably the keys, because this is the time where you're going to start to see a lot more customers leave the business. Sorry, leave you as a marketing team, or leave your business overall. So I think having messaging to customers, I think that is really important during these times. That really talks to, I guess, how does your product benefit during a time of economic downturn? And I think if I look at an example of where I've worked previously, like Foxtel, I think during COVID, Foxtel were giving away free channel packs to customers during COVID, and they're really tailoring their message to sort of stay in tonight, watch the world's best entertainment on us for free, and trying to keep those customers happy and retain those customers through your messaging, but also giving away things like, freebies or trialing this product or trialing this service, because then they trial that service and they can't live without it, and you end up going back into normality, and they keep up with that product, or they keep on adding additional services. So I think keeping the customers happy during this economic downturn is really, really important. And just to that too, I think a lot of brands now are coming up with and creating loyalty programs and loyalty teams. So trying to keep the customer happy with specific loyalty programs, and that could be, offering discounts. It could be giving away free movie tickets, free giveaways to really help with retention. So the more loyalty programs that you've got in play, and the more you're talking to your customers about those loyalty programs, I think it can really help to retain those customers. Customers who are possibly thinking about leaving, loyalty programs can allow them to stay, I think.
Yeah, it's funny how when the economy gets tight and then all the focus goes on retention. We've got to keep the customers. When the market's good, it's like, let's get more customers in the front door, and tend to sort of forget, the imbalance sort of happens there. It's quite funny how I guess companies operate when the market sentiment kind of shifts.
Yeah, as you said, I think brands tend to go, well, let's reduce our budget. Let's go back to optimization. Let's look at what channels are working well, the content I spoke about. But I think sometimes customer can be an afterthought. Yeah. And I think it probably should be at the forefront of minds. Is if we can keep, retention, keep our customers, we can still do the other things. But I think the focus probably should be on those customers during those times. Retain those, and you can do more with your other channels.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so much great advice in there, mate. But unfortunately, it's time to wrap up. So, it's been great to chat, Gareth. You've given us so many insights. Thanks for coming on and joining me.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Thanks for tuning in. Some amazing insights from a great marketing leader. If you found this insightful, make sure you hit the subscribe or follow button now, as we have some great episodes coming up. And if you have any questions or would like to chat, reach out to us at customersmarts.co. Catch you next time.